Hi guys, how you all doing? Welcome back to another video on the channel. I've been quiet the last few days, but here we are in the build up to Bradford at home tomorrow in the League Cup, of course, a trophy that Newcastle are the holders of. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Look, if you're new to the channel, please do subscribe if you haven't done already. Give us a thumbs up or a like if this is the sort of content you want to see, and leave your comments below. I know things are a little bit quieter since the transfer window closed. I can see that in terms of the viewing numbers, etc. But look, let's try and keep the conversation and the content going. And look, there's going to be lots of stories throughout the season that we can keep ourselves busy with and kind of get our teeth into. And I wanted to come on today and talk about the man, or one of the men, I was speaking about all summer long, Yoane Wissa, but in a slightly different way this time around. Of course, I think I mentioned his name every half an hour throughout the entire last 2 months of the transfer window as Newcastle furiously tried to sign him. Of course, we know what happened with his injury and international duty, and he's missed his first few matches as a Newcastle United player, and that has been, without doubt, from what I'm hearing, a huge frustration to Eddie Howe, his coaching staff, and I think all the other players as well, who were all hoping that there would be two decent options or good options at the top end of the pitch to replace the departed Alexander Isak, what with games coming thick and fast. Now, Eddie had an update today on his injury situation. I asked him, like, to what extent is he injured? Does he need an operation? Do they need to go in and have a look? He says no, it's just a case of rehab, no operation or surgery needed, and he's receiving his treatment here in Newcastle rather than going down to London or elsewhere to have that. Now, look, a ridiculous situation that he's got injured, given the fact that he hardly missed a game as a Brentford player after 4 years there, and I think it just was systematic of Newcastle's transfer window that the minute he becomes a Newcastle United player, literally the minute he becomes a Newcastle United player, he hasn't played or even trained for a minute yet. The minute he becomes a Newcastle United player, he manages to get himself injured and is missing for a fair chunk of the season. Now, there has been no definitive timescale put on this yet. The word we were hearing that was coming out of both his camp and the club was round about 4 to 5 weeks. That was after the Wolves game. I was told that. So what? Just under about a week and a half ago, 10 days ago. Eddie's since been a little bit fluid with his language. And then said, he's hoping that he'll be back after the international break, and then I think he then said he'll have a race against time to be fit for the Brighton game. And then today, to me, he said he's hoping that he's back the first game after the international break, which I think is that match away to Brighton on October the 18th. Now, I've been hearing one or two other things that they don't know exactly how long it's going to be, and it could be longer, and perhaps they're just trying to maybe manage expectations. But also, look, they're going to want to be positive about the situation and hope that Yoane Wissa is back sooner rather than later. Because, look, of the two striker signings on that last week of the transfer window, Voltemade and Wissa was the one that was set to go straight into the team, and as Eddie Howe described him today, is Premier League ready to go straight into that lineup and play. So, look, I think the plan was, from what I'm hearing, Wissa would have gone straight in. He would have played in the Champions League against Barcelona. He would have played against Wolves. Look, there might have been one game that Voltemade played that week, perhaps the Bournemouth game at the weekend, but Wissa would have been the one to go straight into the lineup, and Voltemade would have just been kind of drip fed in as he's trying to get to grips with Premier League football. And look, that's a question that's been asked a lot over the last sort of few days since the Bournemouth performance and result, where, as Eddie Howe admitted afterwards, wasn't pleasing on the eye, but it was a good point. But really, throughout the season, do you really want to be going away to Leeds and Bournemouth and Aston Villa and drawing 0-0 every week? No, you want to be going there and trying to steamroller these teams. Now, I feel, while Newcastle are still trying to feel their way around and the team is trying to evolve like they are with Voltemade in there, I think there's going to be a few more matches like that. Look, I think the defence looks really strong. you can switch to a back five like you did on Sunday at Bournemouth, and you've got big, strong, good defenders like Dan Burn playing at the top of his game, Sven Botman who came back in there, of course Fabian Schär and Malik Chow. You've got good central defenders, good full-back options as well, and I feel the team looked good at the back, and we've seen that, 3 clean sheets on the road, very impressive. How do you then turn that into goals at the other end? Well, I think when Alexander Isak was in the team, I think he at times got the team out of a hole. I think his pace and his power and his running ability, and he'd go into these areas that defenders didn't want to go to. I think that would get Newcastle up the pitch, and I think it's going to be a different way of playing with Voltemad. Now, I think Wissa, I'm not saying he's Alexander Isak, but he certainly is closer to Alexander Isak than what Voltemad is. And I think if Wissa had been in the team, we might have seen similar to what we saw last season. But as Eddie Howe has kind of alluded to, Newcastle are almost having to sort of find their feet and evolve as they go along. This, ideally they should have got Voltemada or whether it would be Nekatike or Sesko. They should have got one of these guys in earlier in the transfer window. Now, of course, we know they tried and failed. Should they have sold Alexander Isak earlier? Yes, probably. But look, we don't know exactly everything that's gone on behind the scenes there, and it's just been a difficult window on a number of fronts, and sadly Newcastle now need to play with the set of cards that they've been dealt. So, look, it's far from ideal. I just think there's going to be more performances where Newcastle go away from home, like we saw on Sunday, like we saw at Villa. Leeds, not so much. Go in, sit with a low block, and try to defend and hope to maybe either grab something on the break or score from a set piece. And I think that's going to be the story over the next few away games. I don't think we're going to see games where you're going to go away and steamroller a team 4-0 or 4-1 and the sort of things we've seen in recent years with Alexander Isak in the team. But in the defence of Nick Voltemad, and look, I think he looks decent so far, and as Eddie Howe rightly said today, he's not had he needs to get more support from the team. The team need to get up the pitch and create chances for him, and I totally agree with that. He's looked good so far in a different way to Isak. I think it's unfair to compare him to Isak. And you look back to Alexander Isak's first season as a Newcastle United player, he scored 10 goals for Newcastle, 10. Yes, he then went on to score 25 and then 27 in the last 2 seasons, which propelled him to that move to Liverpool and become British transfer record. But he scored 10 goals that first season, and Nick Voltemad might only score 10 this season, or 12 or 15. And I think it's really unfair to compare him to a guy who'd been playing with those players for a long time, and he understood where Bruno Guimaraes was going to play, or Tonali was going to play, or where Jacob Murphy was going to cross the ball, whatever. Now, we saw signs of it on his debut, because Voltemad got on the end of a Jacob Murphy cross, and I think it will come over time. I actually do think he will be a good Newcastle United player. I just think it's really unfair to pile pressure on him. The difficulty is pressure will be piled on him because he right now is the only out-and-out striker Newcastle have got available. Yes, Will Asula's there, but I think we've seen enough from Will Asula over the last season to suggest that he's either A, not ready for the Premier League, or he's not Premier League standard. And look, I think that's why Newcastle would have accepted the offer from Eintracht Frankfurt on transfer deadline day, despite their situation, had that £30 million offer been slapped on the table by Frankfurt, and it wasn't. It was pretty much withdrawn with a couple of hours to spare. So that's another story. But yeah, I just think with Voltemad, I think you need to sort of not that anyone's giving him any pressure, but and I see a lot of you guys saying, look, we need to stop talking about Isak, and I totally get that, but I do think it's important to suggest the fact that it's a totally different way of playing. Newcastle are having to get used to it, and that is going to take time. It's not ideal. It's happening when fixtures are coming thick and fast. It's not ideal when you don't have a replacement who can come in and come in and share the load. And Eddie Howe said that today. He said, look, we'd really love to have Yoane available right now, and he said, look, we certainly need him back, and we need him back quickly because we need him to share the load and protect Nick's fitness. And by that he means, we heard him after the Wolves game. I did an interview with Voltemad, and he said he was struggling at half time. He had cramps at half time. He hadn't been used to this, the physicality and the pace of the English game. He didn't have that over in Germany. And even Bruno touched on that on Thursday. He says last Wednesday at his press conference, he said he was complaining at half time. He said, I'd never seen anything like that before, a player getting cramp at half time. But that shows the difference in the two leagues. So you can't then ask him to come in and start 3 games in 8 days, he's going to break down, he's going to get injured, and you're going to be left with nothing up front. So I fully understand, and I expected Eddie to leave out Voltemada against Barcelona last week. Anyone who's willing to listen, I was telling them I thought Anthony Gordon will come in, play through the middle, Voltemada will be in the bench to ensure they've got a centre forward to play against Bournemouth, what with Anthony Gordon suspended. Now look, I think he'll play more moving forward. Will he start against Bradford this week? Probably not. I think Asulo will probably start up front, but I think he'll probably be given another half an hour. Will he start against Arsenal on Sunday? I think yes. I think he'll be given the opportunity to do so because he needs to get used to playing with his new teammates. But the way Eddie's talking, it sounds as though he's not going to play. He's certainly not going to play 90 minutes over the next few weeks, and it's just a frustrating situation where, you know, you've got Champions League football, you've got Premier League to contend with, you've got these cup matches, and you've essentially got half an out-and-out striker in the shape of Nick Voltemade. Because for me, I don't know if he is a number 9. Yes, you've got Will Asula there, he'll be able to play this week, but is he going to start against any Premier League team? I very much doubt that. You look along the road there at Sunderland and they've got a lot less games to play than you. I was there on Sunday. They've got 3 strikers. They've got 3 strikers for the Premier League, and I just hope that doesn't come back to haunt Newcastle. I feel you're going to be scrapping around in January trying to get another striker in. I just think with the number of games you've got in the Premier League and the Champions League, you need 3 strikers. You really need 3 strikers, because you have an injury to one, like we've seen with Wissa, and suddenly you're down to 1 player. And I know Eddie's always counted Anthony Gordon as his number 3 striker, but then that takes an option away wide left as well, and that leaves you only Harvey Barnes out there. But look, without doubt the rest of the players need to step up. We need to see goals from the likes of Bruno and Tonali and Murphy and Barnes, Elanga. These guys need to start chipping in. We can't just sit there and go, oh, well, Voltemade's our number 9, he's meant to be the one scoring goals. A bit of the pressure needs to be taken off him, and I was getting a sense from Eddie Howe today that that's the way he was talking. Look, I think Voltemade will be good. I think it's a bit unfair on him that he's come in and he's the only striker at the moment. Had Yoane Wissa been available, as I say, he'd have been able to share the load, but that's not been the case, and we're going to have to wait and see how long it is until Wissa is back. I mean, that situation is a nightmare. To have put the amount of time and man hours and patience in the deal for Wissa, and then to pay £55 million for a guy that was worth less than that given his age. He's just turned 29. The first offer was 25 million. You end up paying more than double that for him. To pay so much for him, you definitely overpaid for him, but you desperately needed someone in to do that, and then for him just a few days later to break down an international duty, I think it's just like, it just sums up the transfer window. Finishing touch to what was a really, really difficult couple of months. But look, as Eddie said today, let's not feel sorry for us. Let's get on with it. I still think we've got a strong squad, and I do think you have a strong squad. You've got 2 players for every position. That's why you're seeing guys like Sven Botman being annoyed about not playing, and Trippier would have been annoyed about being dropped at the weekend, and Lewis Hall's been champing at the bit to get back in, and I think Lewis Miley's been frustrated at not playing. And that's because you've got competition for places, but then it's up to Eddie to manage them and say, look, you are going to get games this season, and they will. I mean, as soon as you have a couple of injuries, these guys come in and things will be different, and then you'll hear players moaning about getting used too much. Difficult situation being a manager, and I think difficult for Eddie at the moment in that he's got lots of defensive options but not many up front. It's just a shame that your 2 players you've been missing over the last couple of weeks are Wissa and Gordon, and that taking the 2 of them out of the picture really drastically reduces your options in the final third. So look, let's see. It's a working process with Voltemade. I think I've seen enough of him to think he'll be decent. Is he going to be Alexander Isak? Probably not, but I think it's unfair to judge him on the Isak that left last season, and a lot more fairer to judge him on the Isak that arrived 3 years ago, who scored 10 Newcastle goals in his first season. So that's my thoughts on the situation. As I say, they're hoping to have Wissa back after the international break. Fingers crossed on that one. Still sounds a little bit grey, a bit of a grey area to me as to when he's going to be back. Good news, it's not an operation. And the fact it sounds like it's just some rehab work. Bad news, obviously, it's the knee, because you always worry about knees, etc. But look, I do think once Wissa is back and available, and you've got both him and Voltemade and Gordon suspension free, I think you've got real good options there. But if one of them drops, like we've seen with Wissa, or one of them becomes suspended, suddenly it starts looking thin on the ground. I just feel you were maybe one striker short in the transfer window, but we all know what happened with Isak's situation, etc, etc, and look, it can't be helped. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the matter, guys. Lots to talk about, lots to think about. Let's hope for no more 0-0 draws. Let's get the goals flying back and look forward to the games coming back again. Okay, guys, leave your comments below. Speak to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.